Lesson 7.5, Proportions in Triangles. The first thing we're going to start out with today is the side splitter theorem. If a line is parallel to one side of a triangle and intersects the other two sides, then it divides those sides proportionally. So here's what our picture looks like. If RS is parallel to XY, then A over B equals C over D. What is the value of x in the diagram at the right? So because KL is parallel to PN and it's in a triangle, I get the proportion 12 over x plus 1 equals 9 over x. And now we're using our algebra skills. Cross multiply to get a proportion, and I get 12x equals 9 times the quantity x plus 1. Distribute. Get our letters together, subtract 9, divide by 3. So the value of x is 3. Try the problem on the bottom. Please pause the video. So here is the solution. We get a over a plus 4 equals 12 over 18. So our first step is going to be to cross multiply. Then we need to distribute. Get our letters together, and our solution is a equals 8. Reasoning. In triangle XYZ, RS joins XY and segment YZ with R on segment XY and S on segment YZ, and RS is parallel to XZ. So let's try to set up this triangle. So I'm going to draw a triangle and label it XYZ. So it says R is on XY, so I'm going to place it over here, and S is on YZ, so I'm going to place it over here. So this is what our triangle is going to look like, and RS is parallel to XZ. So they tell us when I do this proportion, YR over RX equals YS over SZ, that ratio is going to equal 1. So then what has to be true about RS? So that means when I divide RS by XZ, I'm supposed to figure out a relationship there. Well, if we go back to the first slide, our extended proportion only works for these. It doesn't work for these bottoms. So I don't think that this is going to have a relationship of 1. So we can't say that they're going to be the same. And you can kind of tell that they're not going to be the same. But what we're saying is that this distance and this distance, so here and here are the same, and here are the same, because that ratio has to equal 1. So if this is 10, then this side would have to be 10. So therefore, R is the midpoint, and S is the midpoint, which is going to make that the mid-segment. And we had a formula for mid-segment. RS is equal to half of the length of XZ. The corollary to the side splitter theorem. If 3 parallel lines intersect 2 transversals, then the segments intercepted on the transversals are proportionate. So notice in our picture, these 3 lines are parallel, and they cut this transversal and this transversal. So then we get some proportions. And you can see by me color coding, we get green over purple equals red over blue. So this is a corollary. That means it is a theorem that falls because of the side splitter theorem. So let's practice using this corollary. Number 10. I see all 3 lines, horizontal lines are parallel, so we can start with a proportion of 5 over x equals 3 over 6. So right away I notice that this is a half. So 5 over what is a half? 10. Otherwise you could cross multiply and get 30 equals 3x, divide by 3, and x is equal to 10. Number 12, same idea. I see three parallel lines. So I'm going to say 3x divided by 4 is equal to 7.5 divided by 2.5x. Cross multiply. Be careful on this one. 3 times 2.5 is 7.5, but x times x is x squared. So I have a second degree polynomial. If I were to graph this function, it would be a parabola. So normally I'd have two solutions. So I'm still trying to isolate my variable. So I'm going to divide by 7.5, and I get x squared equals 4. To get rid of the squared, I take the square root, and we get two solutions, plus or minus 2. In this case, we can't have a negative measurement, so the only answer would be positive 2. Number 11, try this one on your own. Please pause the video. So if you got stuck on this one, there's probably a good reason for it. Here's our setup. I need to cross multiply my proportion, and then I get the bottom chunk times the top chunk. And remember from last year, you multiplied this out, you distributed the x to both terms, you distributed the negative 2 to both terms, and I think some of you learned to call that foiling. So you get x squared plus 4x minus 2x minus 8. So again, a second degree polynomial. So I'm going to simplify that so my x's combine. Now the only way to solve a second degree polynomial, over here we could do it algebraically because we didn't have this b value. And here's what I mean by the b value. Ax squared plus bx plus c. See how we just have ax squared? But over here we have an a b, and a c. So we'll keep going. I want to get that in standard form, so I'm going to isolate it as 0. And now we go to our factoring. So last year in Algebra 1 you learned how to factor, so we needed two things to multiply to negative 8 and add to negative 7. So then I thought about factors of 8, 8 and 1, 4 and 2. I have to make a 7. So I want a negative 8 and a positive 1 because I needed a negative 7. So negative 8 plus 1 gives me negative 7, and then negative 8 times 1 gives me negative 8. So then I can plug those values in, and now I need to solve. So chunk times chunk has to be 0, so that means one of these has to be equal to 0. So if I set the first chunk equal to 0, I'd add 8 and get 8. If I set the second chunk equal to 0, I subtract 1 and I get negative 1. So my solutions are 8 or negative 1. So there are two different solutions. And again, we're only talking about positive values, so our only answer would be 8. And I'm probably not going to put a question like this on your test, but this is something that you're expected to remember next year when you get to Algebra 2. Three campsites are shown in the diagram. What is the length of site A along the river? So we're trying to find the purple length. So what we can do is we have these parallel lines, so we can set up some proportions. So the first proportion is going to be 9 over 7.2 equals x, the purple, over 8. And then if we cross multiply, I get 9 times 8 is 72. 7.2 times x, divide by 7.2, and I get 10. So the purple length would be 10. Now I need to find this green length. So I'm going to do 8 divided by 6.4 equals 7.2 divided by the green. And again, if I cross multiply, I get 8y equals 46.08 equals 5.76 yards. So if I divide by 8, I get 5.76. Try the next two multiple choice questions on your own. Please pause the video while the students work. Here are the solutions. Green over something has to equal purple over red. So we're looking for this blue piece, so that's going to be CD. In the next problem, you're supposed to figure out which proportions are not true, and after checking all of these, D is the one that will not work. Let's try this one together. What is the value of y? So I'm going to do y divided by 2y equals 3 divided by 3y. And I'm going to cross multiply my proportion. And I get 3y squared equals 6y. Again, I need to get this into standard form. And this is what standard form looks like. So I'm going to subtract the 6y. And I get 3y squared minus 6y plus 0, if you want to fill that value in, equals 0. And now I need to solve this. Well, I can't solve it algebraically, so I need to factor it again. So I do see a common factor here. I can factor off a 3y. So if I divide the first chunk by 3y, I'm left with y. The second chunk, I get 2. So now I set the first term equal to 0. I set the second term equal to 0, because one of those has to be 0, because we have chunk times chunk equals 0, so one of them has to be 0. So this gives me a solution of 0, and this gives me a solution of 2. So those would be our two solutions, and 0 is not an option because you can't have a length of 0, so then A is the correct choice. And again, I would say that is a hard level question. In triangle QRS, segment XY is parallel to SR. So let's try to draw a picture. So this line here, SR, tells me that that's going to be my base, so then I knew Q had to be on top. XY divides QR, so that SX is equal to 3, and XQ is equal to 2X. So then I know that this is my 3, this is my X, and this is my 2X. RY, so that makes this Y, is 4.5, and YQ is 7.5. So there's my setup, and that's probably the hard part about this question. So now I can just set up my proportion. So that's what my proportion is going to look like, and then I'm going to cross multiply, and I get 9x equals 22.5. Divide both sides by 9, and I get x is equal to 2.5. The question says, what is the length of QS? So here's my setup. QS is the purple, 2x plus 3. So then I'm going to plug that in, and QS would be equal to 8. So this is a multi-step question. This concludes our notes for lesson 7.5.